February 19th of this year, the second pre-order run of Frame1 sold out within 3 minutes, leaving a lot of would-be users behind. For many players, including myself, this controller represents the only path forward to continue playing the game we love, but the global chip shortage is severely limiting the amount of units I can produce. So, to bridge the supply gap and end this rectangle shortage, I'm proud to announce the release of Frame1, an open source hardware solution that makes it possible for anyone to build their own high-performance rectangle easily, even with no prior experience. The Raspberry Pico was released just a couple months before the first round of Frame1 units started shipping. It's an impressive, powerful microcontroller board that any individual can go out and buy for just $4. So far, it's done a pretty good job of staying in stock, which is insane. That brings us to Arte. You might know him for the 1000Hz adapter overclocking guide, or the reduced input dispersion code for Dolphin, or his intercontinental netplate build Crystal, or any of his other contributions to the scene. In March of 2021, Arte released his first version of Pico Rectangle, an open source rectangle firmware for the Pico, which is still seeing steady updates. With a fast microcontroller and the necessary code to support it, the Pico became the first DIY solution to reach performance parity with the Frame1. Frame1 and Pico-based DIY solutions are currently the only options that support an internal 1000Hz pulling rate over USB for Dolphin, and both have the lowest latency on console. It also has some features that I've not implemented yet for Frame1, like native switch support without an adapter. It's a fantastic project, which is why the Pico and Arte's code are at the heart of Frame1. Now for Crane. Crane has been a pillar of the DIY rectangle scene for nearly as long as it's existed. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say without him and the resources he's provided, that community would be a fraction of what it is today. I've been short on time, but he took some time out of his also busy schedule to help test the board and do a full build video. Huge shoutouts to both of them. This is the OF1 board. For reference, the board supports mechanical switches, making it functionally similar to a Frame1 Lite as opposed to the optical switches found on the Heavy. Other than the Pico, the Frame1 board only has two required components, the main Type-C port and a diode. The footprint for the Pico is here. These pins on the edges are used for the button connections. The USB signal gets routed from the Pico to the main board here. There's an optional internal Type-C port here. The diode for the power goes up here, and all the buttons get connected here. For each of these tasks, the board has multiple options, depending on your budget and level of soldering experience. The more advanced options will generally save you both time and money. To solder the Pico to the board, you can either solder pin headers to the Pico and slot it inside, or use its castellated edges and solder it directly. This decision also determines how the USB connections will be routed to the OF1 board. If you use the pin headers, you can either make use of the optional internal Type-C connector, or just strip a micro B cable. The center Type-C connector is optional and can only be used if you use the pin headers for the Pico. If you solder the Pico in directly, you don't need that connector or a cable. You can instead solder the USB connection in through the back. There are two diode footprints for power. One can be assembled via third party easily, and the other one can be assembled yourself easily. Only one diode should be used. Do not populate both. For the switches, you can either use Kale hot swap sockets, or just turn the switches 180 degrees and solder them directly. The main Type-C connector is one that I would not recommend soldering yourself, especially if you're inexperienced. In my opinion, getting assembled through a third party is easily worth the extra money. We are not selling these boards. Instead, all of the OF1 schematics, fabrication files, and more are available in the GitHub link in the description. There's also a guide on how to use these files with websites like JLC-PCB to produce boards with the Type-C ports and diodes already soldered on, making the rest of the work a simple, beginner-level soldering job. To get JLC's minimum quantity of 5 assembled boards at the time of this video costs about $45 total, or about $9 per board. Buying the bare board standalone without parts is about $20 for 5, but I generally would recommend just spending the extra money for assembly to save a lot of time and effort. Soon we'll be selling Revision 1 Heavy chassis B-Stock and Extras. These are good for modders or light users who want mechanical switches in a metal case, and they happen to also be perfect for this project. We have a lot of cases and we'll be selling them in at least 2 waves. Each one includes the main body, steel switch plate, bottom panel with a rubber grip, and screws, for $100. For reference, this is in the same price range as a layered laser cut case you might order from Sencut or Pinocchio. If you want to make your own case from scratch, or even just mess with the physical layout, I'm dedicating a future video to that subject, just like this one with all the design files and everything. But given the existing Frame1 resources between the Discord and this project, it should be relatively simple to do already. OF1 boards are compatible with the Revision 1 Heavy and Revision 1 or 2 Light cases. Sometime after the upcoming Rev 2 Frame1 batch ships, I'll make a variant of the OF1 board that's compatible with Rev 2 Heavies and put Rev 2 Heavy case extras up for sale. Alongside cases, I'm also putting a lot of black and white caps in stock. If you run out, there are a number of DIY options you can find elsewhere. I hope this project will help lower the barrier of entry for players who want or need this type of controller. The DIY community and resources have always been extremely important to our scene. This is where I started. Relying on a single OEM for our controllers will never be the solution, and I believe more options like this are the only way we can keep our game accessible for the foreseeable future.